The cave on Mount Silene faced the east. This was the quality of it that Maya had chosen when she had chosen it. The particular orientation of the cave opening toward the direction of the morning light. The quality of the cave that received the first light of the day before any other opening in the mountain received it. The cave that was most completely the cave of the morning rather than the cave of the dark. She had chosen it for the hiding, for the quality of the withdrawn that was her nature, and that the particular circumstances of her pregnancy had made the quality she needed most. She was a Pleiad, the daughter of Atlas, the sister of the other 6 daughters of the great Titan who carried the sky, and she had the quality of the gentle and the private that was her most fundamental nature. The quality of the star that was present in the night sky, but not the brightest. The quality of the presence that preferred the quality of the beautiful distance to the quality of the immediate and the attended to. Zeus had found her anyway. This was the quality of Zeus that could not be avoided by any quality of the hiding. The king of the gods directed his attention toward the thing he was attending to with the full force of the divine sovereign's awareness, and the full force of that awareness was not something that the gentle and the withdrawn could remain hidden from for long. He had found her, and the finding had produced what the finding of the beautiful and the gentle by the king of the gods produced, and now Maya was in the cave on Mount Silene, with the quality of the new mother in the quality of the new morning, and the infant was in the quality of the just arrived. He was not still. This was the first and the most fundamental quality of the infant who had arrived in the cave on the mountain in the quality of the morning. He was not still, not in the ordinary way of the infant who was restless, in the ordinary way of the new body that had not yet learned the quality of the ease, not still in the quality of the nature expressing itself from the first moment, the nature that could not be still, because stillness was not what the nature was, the nature of the crossing and the between and the always moving toward the next thing, expressing itself in the form of the infant who could not hold the quality of the settled, because the quality of the settled was not what he was. Maya looked at him with the quality of the mother, attending to the child she had just produced. She felt the quality of his nature in the quality of her attending, felt it with the particular perception of the mother, who was also a goddess, and who could therefore feel in the quality of the new being, the full expression of what the new being was going to be. She felt the crossing quality in him, the quick and the warm and the between, and she felt it with the combination of the love and the slight quality of the apprehension that the parent felt when the full force of the child's nature was visible before the child had the development to manage it with any quality of the considered. He was going to be a great deal. He found the tortoise at the cave entrance before the morning had fully arrived. He had moved to the entrance of the cave in the quality of the infant who was not quite an infant, the being who was in the form of the newly born, but who was in the quality of the already fully formed, the divine infant whose nature was present in its complete expression from the first moment rather than developing across the years of the mortal child's gradual becoming. He had moved to the entrance, and the tortoise was there in the quality of the morning. The creature moving across the threshold of the cave with the slow and patient quality of the tortoise, that was the opposite in every way of the quick and the between quality of the divine infant watching it from the cave entrance. He picked it up. He picked it up with the quality of the immediate understanding, the understanding that arrived not as the conclusion of the reasoning process, but as the direct perception of the being whose intelligence was the intelligence of the instant, the understanding that was present before the thought had time to formulate itself as a thought. He held the tortoise, and he felt the quality of the shell and the quality of the hollow that the shell was the cover of, and the quality of the potential that the shell represented in the form of the instrument that was not yet the instrument, but that was already the instrument, in the quality of the understanding that had arrived the moment his hands had touched it. He looked at it. He looked with the full quality of the delight, the particular quality of the being who found in the world the constant and the inexhaustible supply of the interesting, the being whose nature was the movement between, and who therefore was always arriving at something new, and finding in the new the quality of the delighted attention. The tortoise was the new thing, and it was also the potential thing, and the potential thing was the most interesting of all the things, because the potential thing was the thing that was on the threshold between what it was and what it was going to be. He carried it inside. He carried it with the quality of the already knowing what he was going to do. The plan fully present in the quality of the immediate understanding, the steps of the making already laid out in the quality of the intelligence that moved from the perception to the conclusion without the intermediate steps that the ordinary mind required. He carried the tortoise inside, and he set it on the cave floor, and he attended to the work of the making with the full quality of the being, who was most completely himself in the quality of the doing. He hollowed the shell. He hollowed it with the quality of the care and the quick, the care of the maker who understood what the material was and what it required, the quick of the nature that could not slow itself below a certain pace, regardless of the quality of the care it was bringing to the work. He hollowed the shell, and he prepared the frame, and he found the sinew for the strings in the quality of the immediate resourcefulness of the being whose nature was the making use of what was available. The God of the crossing, who found in the crossing between the material and the instrument the same quality of the between that he found in every other form of the crossing. He strung it, 7 strings, the particular number that expressed in the form of the instrument the quality of the 7 notes of the scale that the instrument would produce, the 7 strings that were also the 7 Pleiades, the sisters of his mother, present in the form of the instrument he was making in the cave of the most gentle of the 7. He strung it with the quality of the understanding that the number was right, not the understanding of the mathematical reasoning, but the direct understanding of the being who felt the rightness of the 7, in the same way he felt the rightness of everything that was genuinely right. He played. The first note moved through the cave in the quality of the first music. This is the thing that deserves the full quality of the attention. That the first music in the world came from this cave on this morning, from the hands of the divine infant, who had made the first instrument from the tortoise he had found at his mother's cave entrance. Not the first sound. The world had always had sound in it, the sound of the wind and the water and the quality of the natural world expressing itself in the medium of the air. The first music, the first sound that was organized in the quality of the human intention and the human making, the first expression of the interior quality of the conscious being in the form of the organized sound that was also the beautiful. He played, and the cave received the music. Maya heard it from the quality of the new mother's rest, and she felt the quality of the music with the full perception of the being whose child had just made it, felt the particular quality of the first music in the world with the combination of the love and the wonder, and the slight quality of the apprehension that she had felt when she had first looked at him, and understood the full force of what his nature was going to be. The music was beautiful. It was beautiful in the way of the first things, completely, without the mixture of the other qualities that the later ages would bring to the music, without the complexity that the long development of the musical tradition would introduce. The beauty of the first expression, the beauty that was the beauty of the immediate and the genuine, the beauty that arrived not as the product of the refined, but as the product of the direct. He played for a while in the quality of the pure delight. Then he set the lyre down. He set it down with the quality of the being who had made the thing, and had played the thing, and had felt the full quality of the making and the playing, and was now in the quality of the already moving toward the next thing. The nature that could not rest in the achieved, but was already attending to the next threshold, the next crossing, the next thing that was on the boundary between what it was and what it was going to be. He looked at the entrance of the cave. The morning had fully arrived while he was making the lyre. The light that the cave faced had entered the cave in the quality of the morning light, the particular quality of the east-facing cave, receiving the first and the most complete of the morning's expression. The light was on the cave floor, and on the lyre he had made, and on the quality of the infant divine face turned toward the entrance. He felt the quality of the world outside. He felt it with the full and quick perception of the being whose nature was the movement between, felt the quality of the Arcadian morning outside the cave, the meadows and the mountain paths, and the quality of the world that was full of the things that were on the threshold between what they were and what they were going to be, full of the crossings and the boundaries and the places where one thing gave way to another. He felt something specific. He felt it with the particular quality of the perception that was the most characteristic of all his perceptions, the immediate and the complete understanding that arrived before the reasoning, the direct apprehension of the thing that was interesting, and the direct understanding of why it was interesting. He felt the quality of the cattle in the Pierian meadow, in the quality of the unguarded, the divine herd of the god of the sun, and the music grazing in the morning with the full quality of the settled and the attended to by no one, the divine cattle of Apollo, unguarded. He picked up the lyre and set it carefully beside his sleeping mother. He moved toward the entrance of the cave with the quality of the being whose nature was the crossing, the quick and the warm, and the slightly mischievous quality of the divine infant who had been in the world for the duration of a morning, and had already made the first instrument, and played the first music, and was now moving toward the next thing with the full quality of the delight and the immediate, and the entirely himself. The morning was full and bright. The world was full of the between, and he was the being of the between, moving through the cave entrance into the quality of the Arcadian morning with the winged quality of the nature that would eventually have the winged sandals to express it, the quick and the warm and the always at the threshold quality of the god who had arrived in the world that morning and had wasted no time in being entirely what he was. The morning was full and bright, and the world was full of the between, and he moved through the cave entrance into the quality of the Arcadian landscape with the full expression of his nature, finding its first great opportunity in the form of the divine cattle grazing in the quality of the unguarded in the Pierian meadow. And the day was the first day, and he was the being of the crossing, and the crossing was already presenting itself in the most inviting of all its possible forms. He moved through the Arcadian landscape with the quality that would always be his, not the quality of the runner exactly, not the direct and forceful movement of the being who was moving from one point to another through the shortest available distance at the highest available speed, the quality of the between, the movement that was most completely itself in the crossing of the distance rather than in the arrival at the destination, the movement that attended to everything it passed through, rather than treating the between as simply the space that separated the starting point from the ending point. He noticed everything, the quality of the light in the morning meadow, the particular quality of the Arcadian morning light that was different from the light of the Olympian altitude, and different from the light of the sea, and different from the light of any other place in the world. the light that was specific to this landscape at this time of day, the quality of the path under his feet, the particular quality of the mountain path as it descended from the cave toward the meadow, the quality of the stone and the soil, and the particular arrangement of the world at the threshold between the mountain and the valley. The cattle were in the Pierian meadow. He felt them before he saw them, felt the quality of the divine herd in the way of the being whose perception moved faster than the physical and was already present at the destination before the body had arrived. He felt the quality of the divine cattle with the particular quality of the being whose nature was the between, felt the quality of the unguarded, the quality of the settled and the attended to by no one, the quality of the boundary between what was Apollo's and what could be crossed into in the quality of the quick and the clever. He saw them. The cattle of Apollo had the quality of the divine animal in its most complete expression, not the ordinary cattle of the mortal farmer's field, not the animals that lived in the quality of the practical and the productive, the divine herd in the quality of the sacred, the cattle that were Apollo's in the way that the lyre was Apollo's and the light was Apollo's, not possessed in the sense of the practical ownership, but associated in the quality of the divine belonging, the herd that expressed in the form of the animal the quality of the God whose herd it was. They were beautiful. He received this honestly, the full quality of the beautiful present in the divine herd, the cattle in the quality of the morning light with the particular quality of the divine animal expressing its nature in the form of the physical. He received it, and he also received simultaneously, and with the same quality of the immediate and the complete understanding, the quality of the opportunity, the cattle unguarded, the morning still early, the distance between the Pierian meadow and the place where the cattle could be hidden long enough for the situation to develop in the direction that his nature was already moving toward. He thought about the footprints. He thought about them with the quality of the immediate and the complete, the understanding of the problem arriving before the problem had been articulated as a problem, the solution present in the quality of the understanding before the understanding had been expressed in the form of the thought. If he drove the cattle in the ordinary direction, the footprints would point toward where he was going. The footprints needed to point away from where he was going. The solution was the direction, drive the cattle backward, the hoofprints pointing toward the Pierian meadow while the cattle moved away from it. He made sandals. He made them from the branches of the myrtle and the tamarisk, the materials that the Arcadian landscape offered at the threshold between the meadow and the path, the materials that were available at the crossing between the wild and the tended. He made them with the quality of the quick and the ingenious, not the careful craft of the maker who took the time the making required, but the quick ingenuity of the being who found in the materials the solution and assembled the solution in the time that the situation allowed. The sandals were made from the branches bound in a way that would obscure the track. The footprint of the branch, sandal, was not the footprint of the divine infant, was not the footprint that pointed toward any being who might be sought. He made them, and he put them on with the quality of the delight in the solution, the particular quality of the delight that was the most characteristic of all his responses to the quality of the clever, the delight of the being who found in the immediate and the ingenious the most satisfying of all the qualities of the existence. He began to drive the cattle. He drove them backward, the herd moving away from the Pierian meadow in the direction of the hiding place, while the hoofprints of the cattle pointed toward the Pierian meadow. The misdirection built into the physical evidence of the movement in the quality of the reversed direction. He drove them with the quality of the quick and the attentive, quick enough to move them the necessary distance before the morning had advanced to the point where the risk of the being seen increased, attentive enough to ensure that the quality of the misdirection was maintained throughout the driving. The cattle moved with the quality of the divine animal directed by the divine infant. He felt their quality as he drove them, the quality of the divine herd and the quality of the movement, the cattle expressing in the movement the same quality they had expressed in the grazing, the quality of the divine animal being what it was, regardless of the circumstances it found itself in. He felt this with the particular quality of the attending to the thing he was in the middle of, the full presence of the being whose nature was the crossing attending to the crossing he was making. He hid them. He hid them in a cave near the river Alpheus, the cave in the quality of the dark and the hidden, the cattle in the quality of the concealed, the divine herd, moved from the quality of the unguarded in the open meadow to the quality of the guarded in the hidden cave by the river. He fed them, and he settled them, and he felt the quality of the completed crossing with the honest quality of his perception. The crossing had been made, the cattle were where he had moved them, the evidence of the movement pointed in the wrong direction. Then he sacrificed 2 of the cattle. He did this with the quality of the deliberate and the significant, not the ordinary practical killing of the animal for the food, but the sacrifice in the quality of the divine act, the offering of a portion of the stolen herd to the 12 Olympian gods, in the quality of the acknowledgement that the divine order existed and that he was placing himself within it. He divided the meat into 12 equal portions, 1 for each of the 12, and he felt the quality of the act with the full and honest perception of the being who understood what he was doing. He was claiming his place, not with a declaration, not with the petition to be admitted to the divine order, through the ordinary channels of the divine court's recognition of the new being, with the act, the sacrifice to the 12 that acknowledged the 12 while also placing himself among the 12, the act of the being who understood that the boundary between the inside and the outside of the divine order was a boundary that could be crossed in the quality of the act rather than the quality of the petition. He covered the evidence of the sacrifice. He covered it with the quality of the practical and the quick, the evidence of the fire and the cooking hidden, the signs of the sacrifice concealed in the quality of the careful, the being who had crossed the boundary, ensuring that the crossing left as little visible evidence as possible. Then he turned back toward the mountain. He moved through the night. The Arcadian night had the quality of the between, the particular quality of the landscape in the condition of the dark, the meadows and the mountain paths, in the quality of the world that was not the day and not quite the deep dark, but the threshold between the two, the quality of the night that was most completely the night in the hours after the moon had risen and before the moon had set. He moved through it with the ease of the being whose nature was the between, and who therefore found in the threshold quality of the night the most natural of all the natural conditions, the night that was neither the day nor the dark, but the crossing between them was the condition most completely suited to the nature of the god of the crossing. He arrived at the cave. He arrived with the quality of the quiet return, the divine infant moving back through the cave entrance in the quality of the having been away and returned, the crossing back across the threshold of the cave entrance made with the same ease as the crossing outward had been made. He went to his cradle, and he arranged himself in the quality of the innocent, the being who had spent the first day of his existence making the first lyre, and then had rested in his cradle in the quality of the undisturbed. His mother was sleeping. He looked at her with the quality of the genuine love, the love of the child for the mother who had hidden herself in the cave on the mountain, to give him the quality of the protected beginning, who had chosen the gentle and the withdrawn over the Olympian court, in the quality of the care for the child who was coming. He felt the quality of the love with the honest and warm perception he gave to everything. The genuine quality of the love rather than the performed quality, the real feeling rather than the expression of the feeling. He settled into the cradle. The lyre was beside him in the quality of the made thing at rest. The first instrument in the world resting in the cave where it had been made in the quality of the morning, the 7 strings in the quality of the still. He felt its quality with the full attention of the maker attending to what they had made, the particular quality of the connection between the maker and the made thing that was his most intimate form of the crossing of the boundary between the interior quality of the being and the exterior form of the made object. The night moved through its hours. He rested in the quality of the infant who was not quite an infant, the being who had made the lyre and played the first music and stolen the divine cattle and sacrificed to the 12 and returned to the cradle in the quality of the innocent all in the duration of a single day, the being whose first day had been the most eventful first day of any divine being's existence. Outside the cave the Arcadian landscape held the quality of the night. The cattle were hidden in the cave by the river Alpheus. The evidence of the crossing pointed in the wrong direction, and the divine infant who had done all of it rested in the quality of the between, not quite sleeping and not quite waking in the threshold condition that was the condition most suited to his nature. The being of the crossing in the condition of the crossing between the waking and the sleeping with the quality of the satisfied and the already attending to what came next. He rested in the quality of the between, and the night moved through its hours, and the cattle were hidden in the cave by the river, and the evidence pointed in the wrong direction, and the divine infant in his cradle had the quality of the satisfied and the already attending to what came next, and the Arcadian landscape outside the cave held the quality of the night moving toward the morning in the faithful way of the world that had always moved from the dark toward the light. Apollo found the trail. He found it in the quality of the divine being who saw clearly, the God of the light and the truth and the far, seeing whose nature was the perception that was most complete in the full expression of the light. He had come to the Pierian meadow and found the quality of the herd's absence, the divine cattle not in the quality of the settled and the grazing, but the quality of the gone, the meadow without the herd in the particular way of the place that has contained a thing and now contains the absence of the thing. He looked at the tracks. He looked with the quality of the God, whose perception was the most complete of all the divine perceptions, in the quality of the clear and the true, the far-seeing God attending to the tracks that were left in the quality of the misdirection, with the full force of the divine perception. He felt the quality of the wrongness in the tracks, the particular wrongness of the hoof prints that pointed in the direction that the cattle had come from, rather than the direction the cattle had gone to, the quality of the reversed that was present in the evidence for the being who attended to the evidence with the full force of the genuine seeing. He followed the tracks in the direction they did not point. This was the quality of Apollo's perception at its most completely expressed, the understanding that the misdirection was the misdirection, that the tracks pointed in the wrong direction, and therefore the right direction was the direction they did not point. He followed the reverse direction with the quality of the divine being following the evidence to the conclusion that the evidence was designed to prevent, the God of the truth following the trail of the misdirection through the misdirection to the truth that the misdirection was concealing. He arrived at the cave on Mount Silene. He arrived with the quality of the indignation that was also the divine authority. the god of the light and the music arriving at the cave of the Pleiad with the full force of the legitimate grievance and the genuine anger of the being whose property had been taken by the being who had no right to take it. He arrived with the quality that was entirely justified. The divine herd was his, and it had been taken from him on the morning of its taking, and the being who had taken it was in the cave ahead of him in the quality of the innocent. Maya received him. She received him with the quality of the mother, who had felt the quality of what her child had done across the night, and who was now receiving the consequence of what her child had done, in the form of the divine being, who had arrived at her cave with the justified indignation. She received him with the quality of the honest, not attempting the misdirection herself, not performing the quality of the ignorance that she did not have, with the quality of the mother, who understood the situation and was present to it without the pretense. Apollo looked at the cradle. He looked with the full force of the divine perception directed at the divine infant, in the quality of the innocent. The God of the truth looking at the being who was performing the quality of the innocent with everything he had. The perception of the seeing and the truth directed at the performance of the not seeing and the not having done. He felt the quality of the performance with his nature's most fundamental quality, the truth, seeing that could feel the quality of the performed innocence as the performed innocence rather than as the genuine innocence. He was not fooled. He said so with the quality of the divine authority and the genuine anger and the full expression of the God whose perception was the most complete in the quality of the clear. He said that he knew that the divine infant in the cradle had driven his cattle from the Pierian meadow in the quality of the reverse direction, and had hidden them in the cave by the river, and that the quality of the innocent was the performance of the being who had done exactly what had been done. Hermes looked at him. He looked with the quality of the warm and the quick and the immediate, the divine infant in the cradle looking at the God of the light and the truth with the full quality of his nature, expressed in the form of the attending to the situation in the quality of the complete and the rapid. He felt the quality of the situation with the perception that was his most fundamental quality, the immediate and the complete understanding of everything that was relevant, the understanding of what Apollo was and what Apollo knew, and what the situation required and what the possible responses were, and which of the possible responses was most suited to the nature of the being he was. He spoke with the quality of the warm and the delighted, the divine infant speaking to the God of the sun with the full quality of the charm and the quick and the entirely engaged with the situation. He said that he was a newborn, and that newborns did not steal cattle, and that the quality of the accusation was the quality of the misplaced, and that the evidence that Apollo was following was the evidence of the impossible, because he had been in his cradle, and the quality of his existence was the quality of the new and the innocent and the entirely too young for the thing he was being accused of. He said it with the quality of the delight. This was the quality that was most completely his in this moment. The delight of the being who was in the middle of the most interesting situation his first day had produced. The delight of the quick intelligence in the presence of the challenge that the quick intelligence was most suited to meet. He was entirely engaged with the quality of the situation, and the engagement had the quality of the genuine rather than the anxious. The being who was in the middle of the difficult situation, and who found in the difficulty not the quality of the threatened, but the quality of the interesting. Apollo was not amused. Apollo had the quality of the genuinely and the justifiably indignant, the God whose perception was the most complete of all the divine perceptions in the quality of the clear looking at the being whose charm was the charm of the performed innocence, and who was not being deceived by the charm, because the charm was the charm of the performance rather than the charm of the genuine. He said that the case would go to Zeus, that the matter would be brought before the king of the gods in the quality of the divine court's resolution of the dispute between the divine beings who could not resolve it between themselves. Hermes felt the quality of this development with the full and immediate understanding. He felt it with the quality that was his most fundamental quality in the situation, the immediate and the complete understanding of the implications of the development, and the immediate and the complete understanding of what the development required of him. The case going to Zeus was the case going to the most powerful and the most perceptive of all the divine beings. The case going to the being who was his father, the being who had made him with the Pleiad Maya in the cave on the mountain, the being whose perception was the perception of the king of the gods directed at the son the king of the gods had not yet formally acknowledged. He wrapped himself in his swaddling. He did this with the quality of the practical and the quick, the divine infant arranging himself in the quality of the most innocent presentation of the innocent, the performance of the infant in the quality of the most complete infant, the being who understood that the presentation of the self in the quality of the genuine was the most effective of all the presentations, when the genuine quality was the quality of the newborn. They went to Olympus. The journey had the quality of the between, the movement from the cave on the mountain to the divine court on the divine mountain, through the quality of the atmospheric and the elevated, the movement between the mortal world's quality and the divine world's quality through the medium of the journey. Hermes felt the quality of the journey with the full attention of the being whose nature was the movement between, felt the quality of the between in the journey as the most natural of all the qualities of the experience. Zeus received them. He received them with the quality of the divine sovereign, receiving the dispute between two divine beings who had come to his authority for the resolution. The king of the gods in the quality of the judgment, the full quality of the divine authority present in the quality of the attention he directed at the two beings who stood before him. He looked at Hermes. He looked at his son with the quality of the king of the gods, looking at the being he had made with the Pleiad. The full and complex quality of the divine father looking at the divine child for the first time, the king of the gods and the infant god in the quality of the first seeing of the one by the other. He felt the quality of the child with the full perception of the king of the gods, felt the quick and the warm and the clever and the crossing and the between and the delight in all of it, felt the full quality of what his son was with the perception of the being who had produced him and who was now seeing what the producing had made. He was delighted. He received this with the quality of the honest, the king of the gods genuinely and completely delighted by the quality of the being who stood before him in the swaddling in the quality of the innocent, the divine infant who had made the first lyre and stolen the divine cattle, and navigated the situation of the accusation with the full quality of the charm and the quick, and the entirely himself. Zeus felt the delight with the full quality of the father seeing the child, and understanding in the seeing the full force of what the child was. He asked Hermes to speak. Hermes spoke. He spoke with the full quality of his nature in the full expression of the situation. The quick and the warm and the charming and the clever and the entirely engaged, the divine infant before the king of the gods, making the case that was the most sophisticated case that had been made before the divine court in its existence. He made the case with the quality of the genuine and the full, not the case of the guilty party, attempting the misdirection of the authority, but the case of the being who understood the situation completely, and who made the case in the quality of the complete understanding rather than the partial. He acknowledged the cattle. He did this with the quality of the strategic and the genuine simultaneously. The acknowledgement, that was also the honest, and that was also the beginning of the resolution that his quick intelligence had already determined was the most complete and the most satisfying resolution available. He acknowledged the cattle in the quality of the being, who understood that the acknowledgement was the beginning of the exchange, and that the exchange was the most natural and the most completely his form of the resolution. Zeus looked between them. He looked between his son and the god of the light and the music with the quality of the king of the gods, attending to the situation with the full perception of the divine sovereign. The quality of the king, who saw both sides of the situation clearly, and who understood what the situation required in the quality of the resolution that was most suited to the natures of the beings involved. He told Hermes to return the cattle. He said it with the quality of the gentle and the direct, the king of the gods directing his son in the quality of the paternal rather than the purely judicial, the full force of the divine authority present in the quality of the warm rather than the cold. He said it, and Hermes received it with the quality of the hearing that was also the already understanding what came next, the immediate and the complete understanding of the being who had already seen the shape of the resolution, and who received the direction as the confirmation of what his intelligence had already determined. They went together to the cave by the river. He and Apollo went together in the quality of the between, the two divine beings moving through the world together in the quality of the first companionship between them, the quality of the relationship that was beginning in the form of the resolution of the dispute that had been the beginning of the relationship. He felt the quality of Apollo beside him, with the full attention of the being, whose nature was the movement between, and who felt in the quality of the movement between two beings the most interesting of all the qualities of the between. He showed Apollo the cattle. He showed them with the quality of the direct and the full, the cattle in the cave by the river, in the quality of the hidden, the divine herd in the quality of the concealed, that was now going to become the quality of the returned. He showed them, and he felt the quality of Apollo receiving the sight of his returned cattle, with the honest and warm perception of the being, who understood what it meant to the other being. Then he played the lyre. He played it with the quality of the gift, the first music in the world played for the god of the music in the quality of the offering, the divine infant playing the instrument he had made from the tortoise for the divine being, whose instrument it was going to become. He played, and the music moved through the quality of the riverside cave in the particular way of the first music, in the presence of the god, who was most completely the god of the music. Apollo heard it. He heard it with the full quality of the being whose nature was the music and the light and the far-seeing. The god of the music, hearing the first music in the quality of the complete, and the immediate reception of the being, whose nature was the music receiving the music in its most fundamental and most original form. He heard it, and he felt the quality of the music with the full force of the divine perception of the being, who was most completely suited to receive it. He was moved with the quality of the genuine, not the performed response of the being who was acknowledging the quality of the gift in the quality of the expected. The genuine and the complete response of the god of music, hearing the music in the quality of the being, who understood music in its most fundamental form, and who found in the hearing the quality of the immediately, and the entirely, and the completely received. He wanted the lyre. Hermes felt the quality of Apollo's wanting with the full and immediate understanding of the being whose nature was the exchange. the crossing of the boundary between the interior desire of one being and the exterior form of the thing desired, through the medium of the exchange that was the most fundamental of all the economic and the relational acts. He felt the wanting, and he understood the exchange, and the exchange was already forming in the quality of the immediate and the complete understanding before Apollo had expressed the wanting in the quality of the word. He offered it. He offered the lyre in the quality of the gift that was also the exchange. The lyre given in the quality of the full and the genuine offering. The first instrument in the world given to the god of the music, in the quality of the recognition that the god of the music was the right home for the instrument that was the expression of the music's most fundamental form. Apollo received it. He received it with the quality of the divine being receiving the thing that was most completely suited to their nature. The god of the music receiving the first instrument with the full quality of the complete and the genuine reception. He received it, and he felt the quality of the instrument with the full force of his nature. The 7 strings and the tortoise shell, and the quality of the music that waited in the instrument for the hands of the god of the music to release it into the world in its fullest expression. He gave Hermes the golden staff, the caduceus, the staff that would become the most recognizable of all the symbols of the divine messenger, the staff with the 2 intertwined serpents that expressed in the form of the physical object the quality of the crossing and the between and the movement between the worlds that was Hermes's most fundamental nature. He gave it with the quality of the divine being giving the instrument that expressed the nature of the being who received it. The god of the light, and the music giving the messenger god the staff of the messenger, in the quality of the exchange that established between them the relationship that would be the most significant of all the divine friendships. Hermes held the caduceus. He held it with the quality of the recognition, the immediate and the complete understanding of the being who had received the thing that was most completely the expression of their own nature, the staff of the crossing in the hands of the god of the crossing. He felt the quality of the caduceus with the full attention of the being who was the between. The 2 serpents intertwined in the quality of the exchange between the 2 directions of the crossing, the staff that was the physical expression of the movement between the worlds. The friendship was made, not with a declaration, not with the formal establishment of the bond in the quality of the ceremony, with the exchange, the lyre and the caduceus crossing the boundary between the 2 divine beings in the quality of the gift and the counter-gift, the exchange that was the most natural and the most completely his form of the connection between 2 beings. He felt the quality of the new friendship with the warm and honest perception of the being who found in the friendship the quality of the genuine, the warm and the quick, and the delighted Hermes in the quality of the first great friendship of his existence, the friendship with the bright and the musical and the far-seeing Apollo established in the form of the exchange of the instruments that expressed the natures of each. The cattle grazed in the quality of the returned. The lyre was in the hands of the god of the music. The caduceus was in the hands of the god of the crossing. And the 2 divine beings stood together by the river in the quality of the beginning of the friendship that would last across all the ages of the divine world. The quick and the between, and the warm Hermes beside the bright and the musical and the far, seeing Apollo in the quality of the first of all the meetings between them. The day was full around them, and the world had music in it, and the god of the crossing had his staff. The cattle grazed in the quality of the returned, and the lyre was in the hands of the god of the music, and the caduceus was in his own hands, and the friendship with Apollo was the quality of the established and the genuine. and he stood by the river in the Arcadian landscape with the full quality of his nature expressed in the form of the being who had completed the first great cycle of his existence, and was already in the quality of the attending to what came next. He thought about the domains. He thought about them not in the way of the philosopher sitting in the quality of the considered reflection, not the sitting still quality of the thought that organized itself across the long interval of the deliberate, in the way that was most completely his, in the quality of the moving, the thought moving through his awareness in the same quality as his feet moved through the landscape, the understanding arriving in the quality of the immediate and the complete, rather than the gradual and the assembled. He was the God of the between. This was the understanding that arrived first and most completely, the understanding that was the foundation of all the other understandings, the quality from which all the specific domains radiated, in the way that the light radiated from the sun. He was the between, the crossing, the threshold, the movement from one state or place or condition to another. Every specific thing he was the God of was this quality in a specific form. The fundamental nature of the crossing expressed in the particular mode that the specific domain required. The traveler crossed the distance. The traveler was the being who moved from one place to another through the quality of the between, the distance between the starting point and the destination, the landscape that was neither the place left nor the place arrived at, but the crossing between them. He was the God of the traveler, because the traveler was the expression in the form of the physical journey of the quality that was his most fundamental nature, the between, the threshold, the movement that was most completely itself in the crossing rather than in the fixed position. He felt the quality of the traveler's world with the full attention of the being who was its God. The road was his domain, not the city that the road led to, and not the home that the road began from, but the road itself, the between of the physical world, the ground that was neither the departure nor the arrival but the crossing. He felt the quality of the road with the particular attention of the being who understood the road as the expression of the most fundamental quality of his nature. The path through the landscape between the 2 points that was most completely itself in the quality of the between. The Hermes were his, the stone markers at the edge of the road, the piles of stone at the boundary of the property, and the threshold of the house, and the crossing of the path, were the physical expression of his presence at every boundary in the mortal world. He had placed himself in the form of the stone at every crossing and every boundary and every threshold in the mortal world in the quality of the always present and the always available. The God of the crossing present at every crossing in the form of the stone that marked a crossing. He thought about the merchant. The merchant was the expression of the crossing in the economic form, the being who crossed the boundary between what one person had and what another person needed through the quality of the exchange. The exchange was the most fundamental of all the economic acts, and it was the act that was most completely the expression of his nature. The crossing of the boundary between the mine and the yours, through the medium of the exchange that produced the relationship between the two beings. He had felt this in the exchange of the lyre for the caduceus. The exchange between him and Apollo had been the most fundamental expression of the economic and the relational crossing. The lyre going from the hands of the maker to the hands of the being whose nature was most suited to it. The caduceus going from the hands of the being who had given it to the hands of the being whose nature most completely expressed what the caduceus was. The exchange had made the friendship, had crossed the boundary between the two divine beings through the medium of the gift and the counter-gift, and had established in the crossing the quality of the connection that was the friendship. He was the God of this. He was the God of the exchange that made the connection, and the connection that was the expression of the exchange. The economic and the relational and the social crossing all present in the single act of the gift and the counter-gift. Then there was the thief. He thought about the thief with the honest quality of the being who had been the thief on the morning of his first day, and who understood the theft from the inside of the doing rather than from the outside of the observing. The theft was the crossing of the boundary between the mine and the yours in the direction of the taking, the crossing made without the consent of the being on whose side of the boundary the taking occurred. He held this honestly. The theft was the crossing. He was the God of the crossing. The theft was therefore his in the way that all the crossings were his, not because the theft was a good or a desirable thing in the moral sense, not because he blessed the taking of the thing that belonged to another being without the acknowledgement of the other being's right to the thing, because the crossing was his, and the theft was the crossing, and he was present in every crossing, including the crossings that the mortal world called theft. He was also the protector of the traveler against the thief. This was the quality that held the complexity without resolving it into the simple. The God of the crossing was the God of the thief, and was also the protector of the traveler against the thief, the God of the boundary crossing present on both sides of the boundary, the being who was the crossing itself rather than the being on either side of the crossing. He thought about language. Language was the crossing of the boundary between the interior of one mind and the interior of another through the medium of the word. The transformation of the interior experience into the exterior form that another being could receive and transform back into interior experience. He was the God of language, because language was the most fundamental of all the crossings between minds, the crossing that made the community possible and the culture possible, and all the human things that required the quality of the communication between the interiors of separate beings. He felt the quality of language with the full attention of its God. The word was the between, the form that existed between the interior of the speaker and the interior of the receiver, the thing that was neither the thought nor the understanding but the crossing between them. He was the God of the word, because the word was the between of the communication, the threshold between the mind that had the thought and the mind that would receive the thought through the medium of the word that crossed the distance between them. He was also the God of rhetoric. The rhetoric was the word in the quality of the directed, the language used with the full quality of the intention to cross the boundary between the speaker's understanding and the listener's understanding in a specific direction, to move the listener from the quality of the not understanding or the not agreeing to the quality of the understanding or the agreeing through the quality of the word used with the full force of the crossing intention. He felt the quality of the rhetoric with the particular attention of the being who had just used it in the divine court before Zeus and Apollo. The quick and the warm and the charming speech of the divine infant, making the case that had been the most sophisticated case ever made before the divine court. He had used his own domain in the service of his own situation. He felt the quality of this with a delight that was the most characteristic of all his responses to the qualities of his own nature, the delight of the being who found in the immediate application of what they were the most satisfying of all the satisfactions. He thought about the boundary stones. The boundary stones were his in the way that the road was his, not because he had invented the boundary or decreed that boundaries should exist in the mortal world, but because the boundary was the expression of the between in the physical world of the mortal landscape, the boundary between the field and the road, between the city and the countryside, between the territory of one being and the territory of another. All of these were the crossings, the thresholds, the between, places that were most completely his domain. He moved through the landscape. He moved through the Arcadian landscape in the quality of the attending. The full and warm and quick attention of the being, whose nature was the movement between giving itself to the quality of the landscape it was moving through. He moved, and he felt the quality of the boundaries and the crossings and the thresholds in the landscape. The places where one quality of the ground gave way to another, the places where the path crossed the stream, the places where the cultivated gave way to the wild, and the wild gave way to the cultivated. He felt each one. He felt each boundary and each crossing and each threshold with the full quality of the attending, not the casual movement of the being passing through the landscape without awareness of what the landscape contained, but the full and warm and quick attention of the God of the between, feeling his own domain in the form of the physical world of the Arcadian morning. He thought about luck. Luck was the crossing of the boundary between the expected and the unexpected, the thing that arrived from the direction that the preparation had not anticipated, the quality of the outcome that exceeded or fell short of the quality of the effort in a way that the effort could not account for. He was the god of luck because luck was the crossing that could not be predicted or prepared for, the between of the expected and the actual, that was the most immediate and the most personal form of the crossing in the individual mortal life. He felt lucky. He felt it with the honest and warm perception of the being who had just had the most eventful first day of any divine being's existence. The lyre and the cattle and the divine court, and the exchange and the friendship, all of it in the quality of the first day, all of it in the form of the crossing and the between. He felt lucky in the way that was the most completely honest. Not the performed gratitude of the being who was acknowledging the quality of the fortune in the quality of the expected acknowledgement, but the genuine quality of the being who had found in the first day everything that the first day could have been. He arrived at the threshold of the mortal world. The threshold between the divine altitude and the mortal world was not a physical threshold in the ordinary sense, not the line on the ground that you could point to and say, "Here the divine ends and the mortal begins." It was the quality of the between that existed between the two conditions of the divine and the mortal, the threshold that he could feel and cross with the ease of the being whose nature was the crossing. He crossed it. He crossed it with the ease that was the most characteristic of all the qualities of his movement through the world, the ease of the being for whom the crossing was the most natural of all acts, the being who was the between, and for whom the threshold was the most comfortable of all the positions. He crossed from the quality of the divine into the quality of the mortal with the same ease with which he had crossed from the cave into the Arcadian morning on the day of his birth. The mortal world received him. He felt the quality of the mortal world with the full attention of the being whose nature was the movement between, the quality of the mortal world that was different from the quality of the divine world in the way of the temporal and the particular, the world that was specific rather than eternal, the world of the individual mortal life in the individual mortal moment, with the individual mortal urgency of the thing that had a limited time in which to be. He loved this quality. He loved it with the genuine and the warm quality of the being who found in the mortal world the most interesting of all the worlds to move through. The most interesting because the most specific, the most individual, the most full of the particular crossing in the form of the particular mortal life at the particular mortal moment. Each mortal life was its own crossing, the movement from the beginning to the ending through the quality of the between that was the life itself, and he felt each one with the full and warm attention of the God whose nature was the crossing. He walked the mortal roads. He walked them with the quality of the attending, the full and warm and quick attention of the being who moved through the mortal world, in the quality of the always present and the always available, the God of the crossroads present at the crossroads of the mortal world, in the quality of the stone that marked the crossing and the presence that was felt at the crossing by the mortal who paused at the threshold between the two directions and felt in the pausing the quality of the divine attention. He was at every boundary. He was at the threshold of the house, the Hermes at the door of the mortal home, marking his presence at the most immediate and the most personal of all the mortal boundaries, the threshold between the inside and the outside of the mortal life. He was at the edge of the road, the stone pile at the crossing of the paths, marking his presence at the boundary between the two directions of the mortal journey. He was at the boundary between the territory of one mortal and the territory of another. The stone at the edge of the field, marking his presence at the crossing between the mine and the yours. He was everywhere that a crossing was, and crossings were everywhere, and he was the crossing itself in the form of the divine being, the between made into the presence that moved through all the betweens with the ease of the thing that was most completely itself in the condition of the between. The mortal world moved around him in the quality of the morning, the mortals going about the business of their crossings in the quality of the ordinary and the daily, crossing the thresholds of their houses and the boundaries of their fields and the distances of their roads, with the quality of the living that was the most continuous and the most faithful of all the expressions of the crossing quality that he was the God of. He felt the quality of the mortal world with the full and warm attention of its God, and the caduceus was in his hand, and the winged sandals were beginning to form in the quality of the understanding that the nature of the being whose nature was the crossing required the instrument of the crossing in the form of the winged sandals that would make the crossing swifter and more complete than any crossing had yet been. The wings were coming. He felt their coming with the quality of the delight, the particular quality of the delight that was the most characteristic of all his responses to the quality of the becoming, the being whose nature was the between, finding in the approach of the next expression of his nature, the most satisfying of all, the qualities of the attending to what came next. The memory of hidden roads and silent crossings still lingered around him, as though every journey he had ever guided remained gently alive beneath the next step he took. There were many among the Olympians whose greatness shone brightest beneath the open sky. Zeus ruled from the heights of heaven, Poseidon stirred the endless sea, Apollo filled the world with light and music, but Hermes possessed another kind of greatness, one that was quieter and more difficult to see. He was the companion of every threshold, the patient presence at every beginning and every ending. Of all his many duties, none carried greater tenderness than the path he walked beside those whose final journey had just begun. Death came to every mortal in its own way. Sometimes it arrived gently, like the last golden light fading across a quiet hillside. Sometimes it came amid the clamor of battle, beneath the cries of grieving friends. Sometimes it appeared after many peaceful years, and sometimes before a life had scarcely unfolded. Hermes never chose the moment. He simply came when the crossing had begun. He appeared not with thunder or blazing light, but with the easy calm that had always belonged to him. The winged sandals made no sound upon the earth. The caduceus rested lightly in his hand, not as a weapon or a symbol of power, but as the familiar staff of one who had walked this road more times than anyone could count. The newly departed often looked back first. They searched for the homes they had known, the people they loved, the fields they had worked, the children they had raised, or the companions who still called their names. Hermes never hurried them. He understood that every crossing required one last glance toward what had been left behind. Only when they were ready did he begin to walk. His pace was never too swift, despite the speed for which he was famous. Swiftness belonged to the messenger, racing across the world with the commands of Olympus. Here, another kind of movement was needed. The path toward the underworld asked not for haste but for quiet certainty. Hermes adjusted himself to every soul. He walked beside kings no differently than shepherds. He offered the same gentle presence to the forgotten as he did to the celebrated. Many imagined death as a lonely passage, yet few truly made it alone. Some spoke as they walked. They remembered childhood summers beneath olive trees or evenings beside warm hearths. Others asked questions whose answers no living person had ever known. A few remained silent from beginning to end, carrying thoughts that belonged only to themselves. Hermes listened to each without judgment. He had long ago learned that words often mattered less than simple companionship. He had escorted warriors whose names would echo through generations, and humble fishermen whose stories disappeared with the tides. To Hermes, both journeys deserved equal care. The greatness of a soul was not measured by songs that survived it, but by the simple fact that it had lived beneath the same sun, loved beneath the same stars, and now crossed the same unseen boundary. There were children who reached for his hand without fear, believing him another kindly traveler upon the road. There were elders who smiled with quiet relief, recognizing in his calm face that the uncertainty of waiting had finally ended. There were those who wept and those who laughed in disbelief, and those who walked with remarkable peace. Hermes welcomed every response as naturally as the changing seasons welcomed dawn or dusk. The road itself seemed to know him. Its winding stones remembered countless footsteps guided by the winged messenger. Ancient trees leaned softly overhead, their leaves whispering with every passing breeze. Rivers flowed beside stretches of the path, before disappearing once more into shadow. The world grew quieter the farther they traveled, until even memory seemed to soften around the edges, leaving only the gentle rhythm of walking together. At last the dark waters appeared. The river Styx stretched before them with the stillness of polished stone, its surface reflecting neither sun nor moon. Upon its shore waited Charon, patient as he had always been, his weathered boat resting against the ancient bank. Few words ever passed between the ferryman and Hermes. None were needed. Each understood the other's place within the order that even the gods themselves respected. Hermes would pause before the boat. Some souls hesitated there, staring across the silent water toward the unseen kingdom beyond. Others stepped forward immediately, as though some quiet certainty had already settled within them. Hermes never urged or delayed them. His task was not to command the crossing, only to accompany it faithfully until the moment another guide received them. There was deep respect between Hermes and Hades. Many mortals imagined the Lord of the Dead as harsh or cruel, but Hermes knew another truth. Hades ruled not with needless anger, but with unwavering fairness. His kingdom existed because every life, however bright, eventually reached its evening. The boundary between the living and the dead required a guardian, just as every road required a beginning and an ending. Because Hermes crossed that boundary more often than any other Olympian, he came to understand both realms with unusual clarity. He knew the warmth of sunlight upon mountain paths and the cool stillness beneath the earth. He belonged fully to neither place because, by his very nature, he belonged to the passage between them. Now and then, his duties reached beyond ordinary mortals. He guided noble heroes whose adventures had filled the world with wonder. He accompanied queens whose wisdom had shaped kingdoms. Even the proudest among them became simply travelers upon this final road. Titles grew quiet. Crowns no longer mattered. Spears, treasures, and victories remained behind, while only the soul continued forward. Each crossing reminded Hermes of something he had always known. Every boundary that frightened those approaching it became gentler once someone trustworthy walked beside them. This had always been the secret hidden within his many callings. The traveler found courage because a guide knew the road. The messenger eased uncertainty because news connected distant hearts. Even dreams carried comfort because they bridged waking and sleep. Everywhere Hermes served, fear gave way to familiarity through companionship. So he continued, day after day and century after century, never growing weary of the road that so many feared to begin. His winged sandals carried him endlessly between the bright world above and the quiet kingdom below, until even those ancient paths seemed woven into the rhythm of his own immortal steps. And as another newly departed soul lifted uncertain eyes toward the long road ahead, Hermes offered the same warm smile he had offered since the earliest days of the world, before turning gently toward the path that disappeared beneath the waiting trees, where the quiet journey had only just. The warm certainty of that quiet road remained with him long after another soul had safely crossed the dark waters, for every ending soon became the beginning of another journey. Hermes was rarely still. Even after leaving the banks of the Styx behind, his winged sandals carried him once more beneath the open sky, across mountains washed in morning light, through forests stirred by gentle winds, and along roads where merchants, shepherds, kings, and wandering poets all traveled beneath his unseen care. The world was always in motion, and so was he. Wherever something needed to pass from one place to another, from one state to the next, Hermes was never very far away. There were moments, however, when all his quickness, all his cleverness, and all his gifts were called upon for purposes greater than the ordinary crossings of daily life. Even the king of the gods sometimes found that only Hermes possessed exactly the right nature for the task before him. One such moment began with sorrow. Io, beloved of Zeus, had been transformed into a beautiful white heifer to conceal her from the jealous gaze of Hera. Yet concealment brought no freedom. Hera entrusted the watch over Io to Argos Panoptes, the giant whose 100 eyes ensured that sleep could never claim them all at once. As some eyes closed, others remained open. Day and night, the faithful guardian watched his prisoner without rest. No warrior could simply overpower such a sentinel. Strength alone would fail where endless vigilance stood guard. So Zeus called for Hermes. The messenger smiled with the quiet confidence of one who understood that every barrier possessed a hidden opening. The greatest walls were rarely broken apart. More often, they were simply passed around by someone patient enough to notice the unnoticed path. Disguised as a wandering shepherd, Hermes approached Argos without haste. He carried no threatening weapon. Instead, he brought conversation. Words had always been among his finest gifts. He spoke easily, telling stories that wandered like pleasant country roads. One tale flowed into another with effortless grace. Argos listened while the afternoon stretched gently across the hills. The giant remained alert, yet even watchfulness could grow comfortable in the presence of such easy companionship. Then Hermes lifted a simple set of pipes. The melody drifted softly through the quiet air. It was neither loud nor grand, but warm and gentle, carrying the peaceful rhythm of grazing flocks and flowing streams. The music seemed to ask for nothing at all. It simply existed, inviting every listener to rest within its calm. One by one, the 100 eyes began to close. Those that remained open fought against the growing weight of sleep. But Hermes understood that even the strongest vigilance could not resist forever. At last the final eye surrendered, and silence settled completely over the hillside. Only then did Hermes complete the task Zeus had entrusted to him. It was done swiftly, without cruelty or triumph. His mission had never been vengeance. It was simply the necessary crossing from captivity into freedom. Io's long imprisonment ended, and the path that had been closed at last opened once again. Such victories pleased Hermes not because an enemy had fallen, but because another blocked road had become passable. On another occasion, the need for his gifts came from an unexpected source. The mighty Ares, fierce god of war, had been overcome not in battle but through deception. The giant brothers known as the Elodei had trapped him inside a great bronze jar, sealing him away where neither his strength nor his fury could free him. Days passed into weeks. Weeks became months. 13 full months the god of war remained imprisoned in darkness, hidden from both gods and mortals alike. Many searched. Few even knew where to look. Hermes did not search by force. He searched by understanding. He noticed the small things others overlooked: a forgotten rumor, a frightened whisper, a silence where there should have been movement. His mind crossed invisible connections as easily as his sandals crossed mountains. Eventually, those quiet clues led him to the hidden prison. The bronze vessel stood silent, its heavy walls holding even Ares captive. Another god might have tried to smash it apart. Hermes instead found the weakness that already existed within the prison itself. With careful skill and quick hands he opened what had been sealed, and the imprisoned god stepped once more into the light. There was no boastful celebration. Hermes simply smiled, pleased that another impossible passage had become possible. Freedom itself was often the greatest reward. Not every mission required secret cleverness. Sometimes it demanded compassion greater than courage. Long after the fires of Troy had burned, the aged King Priam faced a journey no father should ever have to make. His beloved son Hector had fallen beneath the hand of Achilles, and the grieving king wished to reclaim his son's body for burial. To reach Achilles, however, he would have to pass through the enemy camp itself, surrounded by warriors who had every reason to stop him. The road seemed impossible, yet impossible roads were precisely those that belonged to Hermes. Once again he appeared not with dazzling miracles, but with quiet reassurance. Walking beside the elderly king beneath the cover of night, Hermes wrapped both traveler and path in gentle concealment. Guards looked elsewhere. Spears remained lowered. Sleeping soldiers stirred but did not wake. The messenger guided each careful step as naturally as though leading an old friend through familiar streets. Priam's hands trembled with grief, yet Hermes remained steady beside him. The old king carried no weapon stronger than a father's love. Hermes understood that such love could cross distances greater than armies ever could. Together they reached Achilles' tent. There the messenger quietly withdrew, allowing two grieving men to meet not as enemies alone, but as fathers, sons, and mortal hearts joined for a brief moment by shared sorrow. The crossing Hermes had made possible was greater than the distance between tents. It was the crossing between hatred and mercy, between vengeance and compassion. Again he asked for no praise. The path itself was enough. These stories spread among gods and mortals alike, and many came to believe Hermes succeeded because he was the cleverest of the Olympians. There was truth in that, but only part of it. His cleverness was never cleverness for its own sake. Every quick thought, every disguise, every carefully chosen word existed to help something move where it had once been trapped. He did not delight in obstacles. He delighted in their becoming roads. That was why Zeus trusted him with tasks no other god could complete. Where others saw walls, Hermes saw doorways. Where others found endings, he discovered beginnings. Where others stood before boundaries uncertain how to proceed, he had already noticed the quiet path, waiting just beyond the edge of ordinary sight. And as the countless roads of the world stretched onward beneath the fading light, another unseen message, another waiting traveler, another unopened gate was already calling gently to the immortal messenger, whose quick and faithful steps were turning once again toward. The promise of another unseen road seemed already to draw him onward, for there was never a boundary that remained uncrossed while Hermes still wandered beneath the wide and changing sky. Not every journey unfolded across mountains or seas. Some were measured not in miles but in thoughts. Some crossed no visible landscape at all. Among all the paths Hermes traveled, perhaps none were more remarkable than those that stretched from one mind to another, invisible as sunlight upon the air, and yet powerful enough to shape kingdoms, friendships, promises, and songs. This was the realm of language. Before a single word was spoken, every thought lived alone. A hope, a fear, a memory, or a dream belonged entirely to the one who held it. No other person could see it or touch it. Every human heart was its own quiet country, separated from every other by a distance greater than rivers or mountains. Yet with a single sentence, that hidden world could suddenly become shared. Hermes understood that miracle better than anyone. When a mother whispered comfort to her child, a crossing had taken place. When travelers exchanged news at a roadside spring, another crossing followed. When poets sang of heroes long departed, when judges settled disputes through careful speech, when lovers confessed feelings they had carried in silence, each moment revealed the same quiet wonder. Thoughts that had existed within one soul alone stepped across the unseen boundary and found a home within another. Words were travelers. Hermes loved them for that. He delighted in the quick exchange of conversation beneath shaded colonnades, where merchants bargained with cheerful smiles, and philosophers explored questions whose answers wandered in unexpected directions. He listened to storytellers, whose voices carried whole worlds into eager imaginations. He smiled whenever laughter spread from one person to another, for even joy itself crossed invisible distances through language. It was never merely the sounds that pleased him. The true wonder lay in understanding. A simple greeting offered to a stranger could dissolve fear. Wise counsel could steady an anxious heart. A promise faithfully spoken could endure for years. Even silence between trusted friends sometimes became its own kind of language, carrying meaning that needed no words at all. Hermes watched these exchanges with quiet satisfaction. The swift messenger who carried the commands of Zeus across heaven also watched ordinary conversations unfold in village squares and humble kitchens. To him, no message was too small if it brought one soul closer to another. Great decrees and gentle reassurances alike belonged to his care, because every act of communication crossed the same invisible threshold. Perhaps that was why those gifted with eloquence often found themselves under his quiet favor. Orators discovered exactly the right phrase when many others failed. Ambassadors found peaceful agreements where armies might otherwise have marched. Travelers who spoke unfamiliar tongues somehow managed to understand enough to receive shelter and kindness before nightfall. Hermes did not choose every word they uttered, but he delighted whenever speech became a bridge instead of a barrier. Of course, language possessed another nature as well. Just as roads could lead toward generosity or toward theft, words themselves could heal or deceive. Hermes knew this better than anyone. The same quick wit that solved impossible problems could also invent clever excuses. A smile could conceal mischief as easily as kindness. He never pretended otherwise. Truth and trickery both required skill with language, and Hermes understood them both. Yet the deepest purpose of speech remained connection. Even when words wandered into playful riddles or harmless pranks, they still reached outward, seeking another mind across the quiet distance that separated every living person. So language continued its endless journey, carried upon countless human voices, always moving, always crossing, always reminding the messenger god of his own immortal nature. There was another kingdom he entered just as easily. It waited each evening, when daylight softened and the world gradually loosened its hold upon waking thoughts. Hermes loved twilight. It was the hour when certainty became possibility, when sharp outlines blurred into gentler shapes, when birds settled into silence while the first stars quietly appeared above distant hills. Evening itself was a threshold, neither fully day nor fully night, and every threshold welcomed his presence. As lamps were extinguished one by one, another crossing quietly began. Eyes closed, breathing slowed. The busy concerns of daylight drifted gently away. No loud gate announced the arrival of sleep. There was only the gradual softening of awareness, the peaceful surrender that every mortal entrusted to the coming night. Hermes walked beside this crossing as naturally as he guided travelers along forgotten roads or souls toward the banks of the Styx. Dreams waited beyond. They came in many forms. Some were woven from familiar memories, transformed into strange and beautiful landscapes where childhood homes stood beside distant mountains, or old friends appeared with faces both remembered and changed. Others carried hidden hopes that waking minds scarcely dared to acknowledge. Still others bore messages whose meaning unfolded only slowly, like flowers opening beneath the first light of dawn. Hermes moved effortlessly through them all. The sleeping world held no barriers for him. Rivers became pathways, clouds became stairways. A single doorway could open into forests, temples, or quiet shorelines, where impossible conversations unfolded beneath gentle moons. Dreams ignored the ordinary laws of distance, because Hermes himself belonged to the places where ordinary boundaries dissolved. Sometimes the gods wished to send guidance, not commands spoken aloud, but quiet impressions carried upon symbols and feelings. A king uncertain of tomorrow's choice might dream of an eagle soaring toward clear skies. A sailor, fearing the sea, might dream of calm waters, stretching peacefully to the horizon. A young woman searching for courage might awaken, remembering only a warm hand leading her safely across a narrow bridge. Hermes carried such messages with the same faithfulness he brought to every task. He never forced understanding. Dreams were invitations, not instructions. Each dreamer awoke, carrying only what their own heart was ready to receive. Some remembered every detail with remarkable clarity. Others retained only a faint feeling that somehow the coming day would unfold differently than the last. Hermes was content with either outcome. The crossing had already taken place. Night after night he wandered through the quiet country of sleep, where countless minds opened themselves to mystery without fear. His winged sandals needed no roads there, for dreams themselves became the paths beneath his feet. The caduceus rested lightly in his hand, not to command the visions that unfolded, but to guide them gently whenever a soul required reassurance more than certainty. And as another evening settled softly across the earth, while the last voices of daylight faded into silence and the first dream began to bloom within a sleeping heart, Hermes stepped across that gentle threshold once more, already sensing that beyond every dream waited another meeting, another friendship, another life ready to be touched by his warm and faithful presence as the quiet night carried him toward. The gentle promise carried within that dream remained with him as dawn quietly returned, for every message delivered became the beginning of another meeting, and every meeting held the possibility of friendship. No god moved among others quite as naturally as Hermes. Some Olympians inspired awe that kept even their companions at a respectful distance. Others ruled vast realms with solemn dignity or immense power. Hermes possessed neither distance nor formality. Wherever he arrived, conversation seemed easier. Laughter came more quickly, and the spaces between strangers quietly disappeared. It was simply his nature. The god of crossings was also the god who crossed the invisible distances that separated one heart from another. Perhaps no friendship revealed this better than the one he shared with Apollo. It had begun, curiously enough, with a theft. On the very day of his birth, Hermes had stolen Apollo's cattle with all the delighted cleverness that only he could have imagined. Another quarrel between gods might have grown into lasting bitterness, yet this one became something entirely different. The young trickster had offered the newly made lyre in exchange, placing into Apollo's hands an instrument whose music had never before existed in the world. The exchange changed them both. Apollo received the lyre and discovered melodies unlike any he had ever known. Hermes gained not only forgiveness, but a companion whose gifts balanced his own with remarkable harmony. The bright certainty of Apollo and the quick adaptability of Hermes complemented one another as naturally as sunrise followed dawn. Apollo loved order, measured beauty, and the clear light that revealed every detail. Hermes delighted in surprises, unexpected turns, and hidden paths that only revealed themselves to those willing to look sideways instead of straight ahead. One found truth through clarity, the other often discovered it through curiosity. Neither diminished the other. Together, they became stronger than either could have been alone. There were days when Apollo filled the valleys with music from his golden lyre, while Hermes listened with quiet satisfaction, remembering the small tortoise shell that had first inspired the instrument. There were other times when Hermes answered with the gentle notes of his shepherd's pipes, simple melodies carrying the peaceful rhythm of hillsides and wandering flocks. Apollo never dismissed those humble songs. He understood that beauty did not always require grandeur. Conversation flowed easily between them. Apollo spoke thoughtfully, weighing each idea with careful attention. Hermes answered swiftly, often discovering connections that no one else had considered. Their laughter echoed across Olympus more often than many expected, for true friendship rarely required two people to think alike. It flourished because each appreciated what the other uniquely brought into the world. Hermes cherished many friendships, yet another relationship revealed an even softer part of his heart. In time he became the father of Pan. The child entered the world unlike any other. His little body bore the legs and hooves of a goat, his ears were pointed, and tiny horns crowned his head. At the first sight of him, his mother, the gentle nymph Dryope, was overcome with fear. The unexpected form of her newborn child startled her so deeply that she fled into the forests, unable to understand what she had seen. Hermes did not hesitate. Where another might have seen something strange, he saw only his son. He lifted the child gently into his arms, smiling with the same warm delight that had greeted so many travelers, dreamers, and wandering souls. Pan looked back at him with bright and curious eyes, and Hermes laughed softly, not because the child appeared unusual, but because life had once again revealed one of its unexpected wonders. Wrapping the little god in a soft hare skin, Hermes carried him upward to Olympus. The journey itself became a celebration. The infant giggled as the winged sandals carried them through the fresh mountain air. Birds circled curiously overhead. The morning breeze seemed almost to dance around them, delighted by the laughter of father and son. When the gods gathered to see the unusual child, surprise quickly gave way to smiles. Pan's cheerful spirit proved impossible to resist. His laughter spread through the halls of Olympus with the same effortless ease that Hermes had always carried into every gathering. Even those who had first stared in astonishment soon found themselves laughing alongside the happy little god. Hermes watched with quiet satisfaction. Love, he knew, often crossed boundaries that fear could not. The distance between unfamiliarity and acceptance was simply another threshold, waiting to be gently crossed. Beyond Olympus, his affection reached still farther. Among all the Olympians, Hermes perhaps understood mortals most intimately. He visited their roads more often than any other god. He rested beside their marketplaces, wandered through their villages, crossed their bridges, and paused at their doorways. He heard their ordinary conversations, witnessed their quiet acts of kindness, and smiled at their clever solutions to everyday troubles. Mortals fascinated him. Their lives were brief, yet they filled those brief years with astonishing determination. They built homes, knowing time would one day carry them away. They planted olive trees whose fullest shade they might never enjoy. They loved, despite knowing loss would eventually come. They laughed, while fully aware that sorrow always waited somewhere beyond tomorrow. Hermes admired this deeply. To an immortal, centuries passed like seasons. To a mortal, every year carried immeasurable value. Perhaps because he guided both their daily journeys and their final one, Hermes saw the complete shape of every human life more clearly than most of the gods. He never looked upon them with pity. Instead, he regarded them with affection. a merchant honestly weighing grain for a customer, a shepherd guiding tired sheep home at sunset, children inventing games beside a quiet stream, an elderly couple sharing peaceful silence beneath the evening sky. These moments mattered as much to Hermes as the grand deeds celebrated in epic poems. Greatness often revealed itself in ordinary crossings completed with kindness. Travelers felt his presence without always recognizing it. Sometimes it was the sudden appearance of a safe path through unfamiliar hills. Sometimes it was the stranger whose directions arrived just when confusion threatened to become fear. Sometimes it was the unexpected smile exchanged between two people who had never met before and would never meet again. Hermes delighted in such moments. The world became gentler whenever distance shrank between one soul and another. That was friendship in its truest form, not merely shared laughter or pleasant conversation, but the quiet willingness to step across the invisible space separating two lives and remain there together, even if only for a little while. As evening slowly gathered once more across mountains, villages, forests, and temples, Hermes looked upon gods and mortals alike with the same warm affection. Every friendship he had formed, every life he had touched, every road he had traveled seemed to weave together into a single endless journey. And with the first quiet colors of twilight spreading across the western sky, he turned toward the oldest path of all, where every boundary met another beyond it, and where the faithful messenger continued walking toward. The first quiet colors of twilight welcomed him onward, for every road he had ever walked, every message he had ever carried, and every soul he had ever guided, seemed to meet within the gentle hour between day and night. No moment belonged to Hermes more completely than evening. Morning carried the promise of beginnings, and noon belonged to certainty, when every mountain stood clearly beneath the sun. But evening was different. It was neither fully light nor fully dark. The world softened into possibility. Shadows lengthened without becoming night. The first stars appeared, while the western sky still remembered the warmth of the departed sun. It was a time that existed between, and wherever there was a between, Hermes was already there. He moved quietly along winding paths that crossed hills now painted in amber and violet. His winged sandals scarcely disturbed the grass beneath his feet. The caduceus rested lightly in his hand, its twin serpents winding peacefully around the polished staff, symbols not of conflict but of balance. Like the two serpents themselves, opposite things could move together without ceasing to be themselves. Day met night, earth met sky, beginning met ending. Hermes understood that every true crossing honored both sides of the threshold. The evening breeze carried familiar sounds. A shepherd called his flock toward home. Before darkness settled over the fields, fishing boats drifted slowly toward quiet harbors, their sails glowing softly in the fading light. Smoke rose from village hearths where families gathered for the evening meal. Travelers hurried toward welcoming inns before the stars fully claimed the heavens. Hermes smiled as he watched them. None of these people knew they were performing the small rituals that had always belonged to him. Every homecoming was a crossing. Every farewell was a crossing. Every lamp lit against the coming night marked another gentle passage from one state into another. The world was full of such moments. Most passed unnoticed. Hermes noticed everyone. He paused beside ancient boundary stones that stood faithfully where generations had placed them. Moss had grown across their weathered surfaces, yet they still marked the quiet agreement between one field and the next, one village and another, one journey ending as another began. Travelers touched the stones as they passed, sometimes offering a silent prayer without even realizing to whom it was given. Hermes accepted each gesture with quiet gratitude, not because he desired worship, but because every acknowledgement reminded mortals that no road was ever truly walked alone. Above him, birds crossed the darkening sky on steady wings, returning to hidden nests among the trees. Below, streams carried their waters onward without pause, joining rivers that would one day meet the sea. Even the wind itself traveled endlessly from one place to another, carrying the fragrance of pine forests across distant valleys, and the salt of the sea far inland. Movement filled the world, not restless movement, living movement. Everything was becoming something else. The child became the elder, summer became autumn, day became night, life became memory, memory became story. Hermes had watched these endless transformations since the first morning of his own extraordinary life, when he had picked up a simple tortoise shell outside Maia's cave and imagined music where no music yet existed. That single moment had revealed the truth that guided everything afterward. Every ending concealed a beginning waiting patiently to be discovered. Every ordinary object carried unexpected possibilities. Every boundary invited curiosity instead of fear. Perhaps that was why he never lingered too long in any one place. He belonged to the path itself. The mountain welcomed him, but so did the valley below. Olympus was his home, yet so were the marketplaces of humble villages, the lonely roads between distant cities, the quiet banks of the Styx, and the dream-filled landscapes visited only by sleeping minds. He belonged completely to each because he belonged completely to none. Freedom was his nature, not the freedom of escaping responsibility, but the freedom of faithful movement. Zeus entrusted him with messages because Hermes never failed to arrive. Mortals prayed for safe journeys because he delighted in guiding them. The newly departed found comfort because he understood their final uncertainty. Even the gods welcomed his presence because wherever Hermes appeared, understanding usually followed. He carried no throne. He ruled no kingdom enclosed by walls. His kingdom was every road. His palace was every threshold. His dominion stretched across every conversation, every exchange of gifts, every act of kindness between strangers, every dream quietly unfolding beneath the stars. Wherever one thing reached toward another, Hermes was present in the gentle space between them. Night continued to deepen. One by one, lamps flickered behind household windows. Families settled into restful silence. The day's labor gave way to peaceful stillness, as children curled beneath warm blankets and old stories faded into whispered goodnights. Sleep approached the world with quiet footsteps. Hermes walked among those footsteps, as naturally as he had walked every other road. He passed unseen through peaceful homes where weary travelers finally rested after long journeys. He paused beside mothers gently rocking infants, whose breathing gradually slowed into dreams. He smiled at old men, whose lined faces softened as sleep carried them back to memories of forgotten summers. Everywhere he looked, another daily crossing quietly unfolded. It was a small crossing, yet it carried the shape of every greater one. Each night, waking entrusted itself to sleep just as every life would one day entrust itself to eternity. The surrender required the same quiet faith. No one could force sleep to come. It arrived only when welcomed gently. Hermes understood this, so he never hurried the dream. He simply remained nearby. Above the sleeping world he moved with the same faithful care that had guided travelers through mountain passes, kings through enemy camps, and countless souls to the waiting shores of the Styx. His winged sandals carried him silently through the deep blue sky, while below him the earth rested beneath the blanket of stars. The caduceus gleamed softly in the moonlight. Its twin serpents remained forever entwined, reminding all who might have seen that harmony often lived not in choosing one side or another, but in learning to move gracefully between them. Below, a single sleeper drifted gently into dreams. Hermes lingered for a quiet moment above them, not as a distant god beyond human understanding, but as the same warm companion who had always walked beside every crossing, whether great or small, the guardian of travelers, the bearer of messages, the friend of clever hearts, the guide of souls, the keeper of dreams. the faithful presence between what had been and what would come next. And as peaceful sleep settled completely across the waiting world, Hermes remained there in the quiet evening, his winged sandals suspended above the dreaming earth, his caduceus held with gentle care, accompanying this smallest and most familiar crossing with the very same kindness he had offered since that first morning outside Maya's cave, when a curious infant had lifted a humble tortoise from the earth, imagined music within its silent shell, and quietly began the endless journey that had carried him ever since from one threshold to the next, from one heart to another, and from waking into the deep and peaceful embrace of sleep.